You know, it's easy to forget, but our planet is, well, it's a water world, through and through. But with all that water, how do we even begin to make sense of everything that lives beneath the surface? Today, we're going to draw a map of that underwater world to understand the fundamental rules that govern it. And let's just start with the sheer scale of this thing. A staggering 71% of our planet's surface is covered by water. It's a massive world that most of us never get to see, but it is by far the single largest habitat on Earth. So, where does everything live in all that water? I mean, how do you even begin to classify it all? On land, it's kind of easy, right? We can point to a forest or a desert or a grassland, but the underwater world, it follows a completely different set of rules. And the very first rule that scientists use to slice up this huge aquatic world is actually surprisingly simple. It all comes down to one thing: salt. The key word here is salinity. And all that really means is how much salt is dissolved in the water. We measure it in parts per thousand, or ppt, and this one single factor is responsible for creating fundamentally different worlds. So this one simple rule creates three totally distinct aquatic domains. First, you've got freshwater, think rivers, lakes, with almost no salt. Then you have the super salty marine world of the oceans, and right in the middle, you have this incredibly important transition zone called brackish water. That's what you find in places like estuaries, where a river flows into the sea. And this isn't just a small difference, it's a fundamental divide. An animal that's built for a freshwater lake just cannot survive in the ocean, all because of the salt. Okay, so we've sorted the world by salt. What's the next big dividing line? Well, it's the one thing that pretty much all life on this planet ultimately depends on: sunlight. And this is where things get really different from life on land. You know, up here, we're often worried about moisture, rain, and temperature, but underwater, the biggest challenges, the biggest limiting factors, are getting enough sunlight to create energy and having enough dissolved oxygen to breathe. So this dependence on light creates two major vertical zones. Up top, you have the photic zone. Photo, like in photograph, means light. This is the sunlit layer where photosynthesis can happen. It's where all the plants and algae can grow and create the energy that fuels everything else. But once you go deep enough, you enter the aphotic zone. Aphotic literally means no light. It is a world of permanent, total darkness where photosynthesis is completely impossible. And to give you an idea of just how thin that life-giving layer is, even in the clearest, most pristine ocean water you can imagine, that photic zone only goes down about 150 meters. That's it. Now consider that the average depth of the ocean is almost 4,000 meters. Wow, that means the vast, vast majority of the ocean exists in complete and total darkness. So when you start combining these two big rules, salinity and light, you start to see these really distinct zones emerge. You can almost think of them as underwater neighborhoods, each one with its own unique community and way of life. Let's start with something familiar: a big lake. You know, what scientists call a lentic, or still water system. So even a lake has these neighborhoods. Right along the shallow shoreline is the littoral zone. Here, sunlight can reach all the way to the bottom, so you get rooted plants like reeds and water lilies growing. Then, as you move out into the open water, you hit the limnetic zone. Light is still getting in, but the water's too deep for plants to grow from the bottom. So this becomes the world of tiny floating plankton. And finally, if the lake is deep enough, you get the Profundal Zone, the lake's own dark aphotic region. Okay, so that's a lake. Now let's take that same concept and scale it up, way, way up, to the marine environment, which is just so much bigger and more complex. So at the highest level, the ocean is divided into three enormous zones. First, there's the Intertidal Zone. That's the shoreline, the tough neighborhood that's underwater at high tide and exposed to the air at low tide. Then you have the Pelagic Environment. That's just all the open water, everything from the surface down to the deepest parts of the ocean. And finally, you have the Benthic Environment, which is the entire seafloor itself, from the sandy shallows all the way down to the mud of the deepest trenches. All right, so we've mapped the neighborhoods. Now let's meet the residents. It turns out organisms in the water are classified not just by what they are, but by how they live. It's all about their lifestyle. And there are 5 main lifestyles, and they map perfectly to the zones we just talked about. First, you've got Neuston. These guys live right on the surface, at that air-water boundary. Then there are the Paraphyton, which are organisms that attach themselves to things, like plants and rocks in that sunlit littoral zone. Drifting through that huge pelagic environment are the plankton, the microscopic drifters that are the foundation of basically the entire marine food web. The active swimmers who power through that same water are the nekton, think fish, whales, sharks. And finally, living on or in the seafloor, in that benthic environment, are the benthos, like crabs, sea stars, and worms. You see how it all fits together? All these different zones and all these different life forms exist in this incredibly productive, but also very delicate balance. And some of these ecosystems are way more important than their size might suggest. I mean, take estuaries, for example, those brackish zones where rivers meet the sea. They are absolute biological powerhouses. Why? Well, because the river is constantly bringing in nutrients from the land, and the tides help trap them there. It creates this rich, sheltered soup that's a perfect nursery for countless species. And wetlands are just as important. They're basically the planet's kidneys, filtering our water and protecting our coastlines from floods. But maybe no ecosystem captures this idea of concentrated, powerful, but fragile beauty better than a coral reef. They're often called, for very good reason, the tropical rainforests of the oceans. All of this incredible diversity is built on a really fragile partnership. See, the coral itself is an animal, but it has tiny little algae that live inside its tissues. Those algae photosynthesize and provide the coral with most of its food. But for this beautiful alliance to work, the conditions have to be just right. The water has to be warm, it can't drop below 20 degrees Celsius, and it has to be crystal clear so that sunlight can get down to the algae. It's an absolutely beautiful system, but it's incredibly delicate. So this entire intricate map of life that we've just sketched out, from the sunlit surface to the dark abyss, from freshwater streams to the deep ocean, it's all defined by a delicate balance of salt and light and temperature. And that leaves us with one final and really critical question. What happens when that balance is disturbed?